Good evening. My name is Santi. I'm a brand manager at Tyson Innovation Lab. There is kind of two stories to tell here. One is the story of the new Innovation Lab, and then there certainly is the story of our first product and brand, the YAPPAH crisps. So I'll spend a little bit of time starting with Tyson Innovation Lab and then tell the story of YAPPAH. So the Tyson Innovation Lab has been in existence for a little less than a year, and the lab was created with a couple purposes. One, a realization here at Tyson that we need to disrupt ourselves. And in order to disrupt ourselves, we're going to need to do things differently. And the second is to address big issues, important issues that our base businesses would never look at. So when we heard that the theme of tonight was Rethink CPG for Good, we got really excited because that's exactly what we're trying to do. And also for YAPPAH, it's the theme of our marketing campaign, the idea of rethinking snacks for good. So I feel like a kindred spirit here. The key for us in rethinking, or the first step for us in rethinking CPG is really unlearning. In order to do things differently, you can't just kind of layer on some new techniques. We really had to go through a process of unlearning some of the things that are staples of big CPG companies. One of those things is the idea of that we're the experts, right? So entering into this journey with humility, that we don't have all the answers. I won't get into it, but there's this whole element of what we're doing with partnering with outside companies, including startups, in order to really learn what we don't know. But that also applies internally on our team. So the people, typically in a big company, obviously there are functional experts. What we've really tried to break through is that culinary ideas can come from marketing. Marketing might have some R&D ideas, and we've really embraced that, that humility in working together. So I think what comes next and what we've been through is what are the new habits we're learning? What is our way of doing things moving forward? So I'll kind of breeze through these and spend a little bit of time on the speed. But the first thing is that we integrate kind of an agile approach to what we do, and we're very mindful to use design thinking methods in solving the problems that we're solving. Way on the right side, something that we've had to learn is being okay with not knowing what we're doing and failing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The format that we have is we go from nothing to in-market in 6 months, which is really, really fast for a big CPG company. And there's a few things that we've structured to help this happen. Number one, we've flattened out the organization for the lab. So the lab has 14 members, all report to Rizal Hamdallah, who's the lead of the lab, across functions. This is not something you would typically see at Tyson, and what this allows is quick alignment, quick decision-making, and moving quickly. The next step is at the highest levels, we have the availability of our leadership to come in and give us the thumbs up, thumbs down on what we're working on and redirect us. So again, you cut out a lot of the alignment that you typically need to get through layers of organization, and perhaps the time spent on areas that leadership is not interested in. And then thirdly, the other thing that we're doing is we're starting small. So this is perhaps paradoxical for a large company with scale, but instead of thinking national launch using your scale, our approach is to start small. So that's a little bit about the lab and our approach. In terms of the second challenge that we looked at is our first space. So we were tasked with creating a delicious, protein-packed snack that helps fight food waste. From our experience with consumers, in fact, one consumer said, you know, the words food and waste really should not go ever in the same sentence. So it's a very big hurdle, but it's one that we dove into. So one way to dive into it is you could write a paper on concept, several concepts on paper, and do a focus group or a basic snapshot, some sort of typical consumer research, and that certainly can have its place. That wasn't our goal, and that wasn't the method that we chose to use. Instead, we went out and talked to consumers across the spectrum. So we talked to people that do not care about food waste, reducing it, don't really see it as a problem related to them. And then at the other extreme, we talk to people that are actually doing things in their home. They're innovating. We call them the innovators in the space, innovating ways to be able to reduce food waste through their own consumption. Including some really interesting people, like we met a guy who spent a year, has spent a year without actually paying for food, combination of just kind of scavenging, finding places that'll give him free food, dumpster diving. We didn't believe him for the first half hour, but then we saw his kitchen. The guy dumpster dives. And then we talked to people in the middle. And this was really, really crucial. Instead of going in with, this is our target, let's learn all we can about them, we really wanted to understand the entire spectrum. And we learned a couple interesting things. So we went into it thinking it was about food waste. Typically we have a hypothesis, and often we say we're open to learning something new, but we're really just trying to validate it. But what we learned from these users in these in-home ethnographies was that it's really about rescuing forgotten ingredients. So there's these delicious, viable ingredients, and either A, some users don't know about them, or B, the users that may know about them don't know what to do with them. And so through this process, we pinpointed these early adopters. They're not doing what I described earlier at home, but they're looking for companies to find ways to help them reduce their food waste footprint. So there's kind of a chasm here between something delicious, appealing, that I want to eat and identify with, and food waste. And for us, the unlock was chef. Fortunately for us, we have a Michelin-starred trained chef on our team who worked at French Laundry in Morimoto. And it's his lens, because this is what chefs do. They're trained to do this, to use every part of the animal, to use all the ingredients at their disposal as a blank canvas to compose something. This is what they've been doing forever. This is what their perspective is. And so applying that lens onto these ingredients that we identified that would otherwise be disposed of. And so the next step was start building. And we decided to use the 5-day design sprint. So typically used for software, apps. We worked with a partner to actually modify it for food CPG. And the idea was, and what we did was, in 5 days, create the product and create the brand. And so I love looking at this because the process was not comfortable for us. This is not probably what any of us are used to doing on the team. And so this is the original concept for the YAPPAH chicken crisps that we have today. We call it right-fi, right fidelity. It's not lo-fi, it's just right-fi. But this is not typically what we would feel comfortable showing top leadership or consumers, right? But in the 5-day design sprint, we did rapid ideation, rapid prototyping, and actually got our top leadership to come in, narrow down the prototypes to 5, which we then got into consumers, both what you see on paper and then actual food concepts. You don't see it here, but during that time, we also kind of unearthed what our brand should stand for, why it should exist, what its values are, and ultimately the name of the brand, YAPPAH, all within those 5 days. After that, a lot of iteration that has led into what we have today. And if you haven't tried them, please come by to our booth, the YAPPAH Chicken Crisps. So what they are shelf-stable crisps in a tall boy craft beer can. Chicken is the #1 ingredient. So you get a lot of protein from these, something not always seen in this category. And then we have from the garden, from the brewery, from the garden, we have rescued veggie purees from juicing, incorporated into the carrot and the celery flavors. Then from the brewery, we're using rescued spent malted barley that's a byproduct from beer brewing. I'll close with a couple challenges and kind of missteps that we had. The first one was the can. We counted them. We got 6 no's, both internally and externally, to making this happen. No one has put this sort of solid product, usually it's liquid, that goes in this sort of can. And what we learned from that was a couple things. One, obviously persistence and getting to the bottom of what the issue was and trying to be creative. But I think too, and really the unlock for us is when you're doing something like this at a large corporation, that small scale, starting really small, becomes a big deal because now folks see that this is a low risk, and let's take this low risk. Our go-to-market is crowdfunding in a couple stores, so it's not a national launch. And that's really helped us and encouraged us as we go into our second cycle to keep kind of the small scale launch integral. And then I'll just touch on one more. So we started with veggie pulp. And from a food safety perspective, the sort of documentation you need just wasn't in place in time for launch. So not that it wasn't safe, but we just didn't have the technicalities in place. And so it caused us to pivot very quickly. Again, the small scale and kind of everything else I've described helped us get to what now is in there, which is a veggie puree that ticks all the boxes. So we're rethinking CPG, we're rethinking food, we're rethinking snacks. We'd love to hear what you guys are rethinking. We've got some rethinking stickers at our booth. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
So I would love to learn a little bit more about the 5-day design workshop. Who's in the room? Is it cross-functional? Is it just brand? What are sort of the checkpoints that you need to sort of get past in order to sort of present a number of ideas? And then last part of the question, how many ideas do you typically present to leadership, and is it leadership that's making the final call? How does that all work?
Yes. Yeah, so the question was a little bit more detail about the design sprint process, who's involved, and what the process looks like. So for us, it starts out at the very beginning with everyone in the room. So full team in the room, kind of dissecting and re-going through the synthesis of our ethnographies, moving on to rapid ideation. So I mentioned earlier, typically there's in settings like this, you have your marketing folks, maybe your insights folks, everyone's present. All the way to, we had even the legal team present. So just really including everyone into that process. And then the checkpoint is midweek, Wednesday, to have our leadership come in and help give us direction. That's the most formal check-in, but honestly, what ended up happening is they'd come in at the end of every day. Even if it was just for 15 minutes. We see where the energy is in the room, love these 3 ideas. These 2, we understand there's energy, but strategically, I know stuff you don't pursue that. I've noticed that you guys are moving this one forward. I would move that forward. So that level of engagement cuts out all that time of development. And then ultimately, it depends on the sprint. For this one, I think initially there may have been 8 ideas, which got cut to perhaps 5 that went in front of users for feedback. Yes, sir.
How many cans actually of the 4 flavors did you go, full production initially?
So we're in that process right now. We've launched through crowdfunding for pre-orders. And it's very small scale, so just a few stores, very low number of units. I'm sorry, I missed you earlier.
Yeah, no problem. I was wondering if you could tell us what Tyson would consider success with this. What does success look like with YAPPAH? And provided it is a success, what comes next? Like, what's the future for YAPPAH? Does it become that mass rollout, or have you guys even plotted that yet?
Yeah, so I think success is a couple things. One, from the Innovation Lab perspective, is proving this model out. Just showing the leadership, showing the company that this can be a way to disrupt ourselves and to innovate. I think we've already gotten positive feedback in that sense, where our next project actually hits a lot closer to our core, which is really exciting in disrupting a category that's larger, for us at least. In terms of YAPPAH itself, the feedback has been amazing. A lot of times in CPG, you're chasing retailers to get your product in store. It is very foreign to us to be chased, and that's what's happening, which we love. And so we're looking at how do we scale up for next year. Yes, ma'am.
So you mentioned that you're
Great question. I was expecting that question. So there's two reasons why. One is, so typically what you would do is like a basic snapshot, right? And people give you feedback on their appeal for the product. It's very different if they part with cash, right? So from a research perspective, that's really important. For this project, we may not do it for every project. For this project, it made a lot of sense because early adopters are very commonly on crowdfunding platforms. And when you talk about buying something made from ingredients that are fighting food waste, you're in an early adopter sort of realm. So it made a lot of sense from a fit there. That being said, obviously we don't need the money. And so it's very interesting. I was talking with someone earlier. If people care about fighting or food waste, typically they also care about hunger. They're kind of linked. And so we'll be donating all the proceeds from crowdfunding to the Greater Chicago Food Depository that helps fight hunger in Chicago. Yes, sir.
So I'm curious about your team composition and how many people on your team are not from traditional big CPG?
It's a great question. So I would say, with the exception of the lead, the head of the lab, Rizal Hamdallah, who has startup experience himself, his own startup, most folks are from a CPG background, or at least have a CPG background. If you talk to Rizal in the design of the team, that was a big consideration. You know, do I actually have people with MBAs, or is it better not to have people with MBAs, and so on and so forth. But I think it may be intuitive to avoid that, but I think the idea is if you're going to really create culture change, you've got to do it from within. So, yeah. Oh.
Is meat going to be at the core of all your new products?
So that's a great question. So ultimately, we're a protein company. So, you know, I was talking with someone earlier, you know, when you think about the population growth by 2050 and the impact of animal protein, there's a sustainability issue, right? So ultimately, the future of Tyson is we're a protein company, whatever that looks like.
Research went into examining taste and texture, because I find it really interesting that you chose snacks as your first entry point. When you think of snacks, the traditional thinking is you have to deliver on taste and texture, because snacks are very much, they satisfy a craving, they're kind of an emotional crux. And it seems like the messages you're being are really on food waste, on packaging, things that are sort of further afield from taste. In your consumer research, did you find that your target market is really focusing on things other than the traditional taste and texture, or did you find a way to reconcile the two?
That's a great question. So the question was, snacks are typically about flavor and texture. We have some other stuff going on. No, you're right. It's always about flavor first and taste. And so I would say that that's why for us, go to market, particularly since we're integrating ingredients that fight food waste, tasting is believing. So sampling is a very big part of what we'll be doing, which if you launch national is not possible. But when you launch smaller, is something that you can start building out and get people talking about it. So it is at the forefront. It isn't necessarily in our messaging as much, but it'll be part of the experience. One more? The back.
All right. I just wonder, what's your opinion? How would you compare products that are like perfectly designed from an incubator with products that are more naturally happened by some founders, such as part of like Potato Top, where they're not necessarily from incubator.
So the question was, if we have an opinion on the difference between products created in an incubator or a lab versus a founder. So the way that we've been tasked, and I think I mentioned earlier, Rizal, who's the lead and the head of the Innovation Lab, has founded his own startup in a different industry. The way that we're tasked, the way we're encouraged, the way that we run things is to think like founders. And so, yes, we live within Tyson, but we are encouraged to own it the way that a founder would. And certainly we can't do that the same way that a founder would, but that is the environment and the atmosphere that's there. So my experience with teams that I've been on in other settings is very different than the team I've been on here. The level of ownership and desire to see this succeed is just a lot more at the personal level.